pension fund is out. The dramatic breaking news came down earlier this morning. Mark Machin resigned as chief executive of the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board. His exit comes amid a brewing controversy surrounding an overseas trip where he was vaccinated against COVID-19. We want to get some more perspective to these developments. Richard Leblanc is a professor of governance, law, and ethics at York University, and he joins us now to talk more about this development. Richard, thanks for being with us. What was your reaction to this news?
CPPIB board did the right thing. They really didn't have any choice, and it was because of two reasons. Number one was the travel. But number two, and I think more importantly, was the vaccine. Right now in Canada and in many countries, the vaccine is not a private good, it's a public good. So jumping queue like that, without a compelling reason for this particular CEO, so far as I know, really is anomalous and signals to employees and to stakeholders. And this is a pretty important company. 20 million Canadians have their pension associated with this. So the board likely met last night or this morning and made the decision.
Yeah, well, they said in a statement, the CPPIB said as much, that they had a conversation last night and he agreed to resign. What's a conversation like that typically? How does that, what generally happens in these kind of situations?
Well, it ranges. I mean, we have another example where the CEO asked permission to travel from the chair, and the chair said yes, and now that is in a lawsuit. You really need, and what I'm advising boards now is, you really want to compel your CEO to come to you for any travel that is non-essential, and that's simply a reputational control because there's two issues. It's a reputational risk, but it also triggers CEO succession. Right, and CEO succession is long. It takes anywhere from 6 to 12 months. I know that CPPIB appointed an interim CEO, but you don't want to have to go through all that in the middle of a pandemic. So good boards now are saying to the CEO, listen, we need all of us, including the directors. We all need to stay put. If and when we want to travel for any non-essential reason, we need permission from the board, not just the chair, but the entire board.
Just because you referenced the CEO, I want to be clear on how CPP stated the leadership change. John Graham taking over for CPP Investments, who they call ideally suited to lead the organization forward, and someone who they say has been instrumental in helping to shape CPP Investments' strategy over the last decade.
So he's the permanent CEO, it looks like. Not an interim.
They said effective immediately, the board is pleased to appoint him as the new CEO. But regardless, to your point, it doesn't appear like this was expected, right? Obviously, these things have happened very quickly, and the resignation coming after, was reported initially by the Wall Street Journal. This has been a challenging time for everyone in the sense that you try to be responsible for yourself first and foremost. I don't think it has been all that helpful for us as individuals during this pandemic to point too many fingers because everybody's in a different situation. But when we are talking about these deeply important roles, I mean, if you're a board member, and one of the things, just perfectly honest, in hearing this story developed this morning, it's one thing if, maybe the head of the CPPIB had been in, I don't know, say Florida or somewhere in the United States. I do wonder about the responsibility of the board itself, or even government officials, quite frankly, to know more about what's happening behind the scenes, because, certainly it's been very much focused on Mr. Machin at this point.
Well, it takes two people to play tennis. So the board has an obligation to say to senior management, listen, you need to come forward. We realize these are extraordinary times. Normally, we wouldn't have to approve your travel or your vacation, but now we will, at least for the foreseeable future. And second, executives have an obligation, if they're in doubt, to disclose fully to the board. The board doesn't want to get caught flat-footed. And directors also tell me that their personal brand and reputation is invoked by something like this. And I know many of the directors on this board, 7 out of 12 of them are female. They're very senior directors in corporate Canada. And if they did not act, it would impair their brand and reputation as well. So the teachable moment for all of these CEO travel and even politician travel is full disclosure, full, true, and plain disclosure ahead of your travel, and then you're bulletproof after that.
So, real quickly before we go, Richard, we have obviously seen a number of examples of, the messaging to stay home, not to travel, and then people in, positions of, great power being, outside the country and ultimately, potentially, in this case, we're talking about receiving the vaccine. Do you anticipate there being more than changes in procedure at the board level? Do you actually expect more wholesale developments when it comes to disclosures from government officials, from CEOs over these next few months as we're, watching the rollout of vaccine on whether or not these people of power have received their vaccine or intend to do so?
Yeah, there will be pressure, and Mr. Trudeau is certainly getting pressure because our vaccines are largely back-end loaded, but I foresee that we're going to get pressure for leaders, political leaders, business leaders. The cost of them going down with COVID, for example, is not the same as a junior level employee. So we might begin to see some criteria. But I would caution there that the Canadian way is that you proceed as we're proceeding. You proceed by age groups and by largely risk factors. And as I said, there's no private market for vaccine. And I think you set a negative precedent when people with money can simply jump queue. And we had another example of a public company CEO who did this a few weeks ago and was terminated by the board. So we might see what you're suggesting, John, but it's not the Canadian way at the end of the day. It's largely based on risk and age and vulnerability and occupation, like first-line healthcare workers, for example.
Richard, really good to get your insight on this breaking news story. Thanks very much for making time for us this morning. Richard Leblanc, professor of governance, law, and ethics at York University.